Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and we will begin with the invocation from Pastor Jason King, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Thank you for the privilege. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for today. We thank you for the gift that this day is. We thank you for the gift of life itself. And God, we come before you tonight and we pray that you would bless these city leaders in every function that they have, in every capacity that they fulfill. We thank you for them, as your word tells us to pray for those who govern, who have authority. So we give you thanks for them tonight. And I pray, God, that you would bless them with wisdom and strength, that you would bless them with virtue, that they would lead and serve the people of this great city well. We know that you love us and you love our city. And we ask, Lord, that you would bless and protect and strengthen this community. And we thank you for tonight and ask that it would be fruitful and peaceful. In Jesus' name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor King. Very nice words. Thank you. The next item is public announcements, and we have Mr. Mays.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I am Michael Mays, your Community Development Director. Have a couple announcements for you for this evening. First, one of the action items in the city's economic development plan is to support small business growth within the community. And so I'm very pleased to announce that the city is partnering with SCORE and the Boulder City Chamber of Commerce to hold a workshop next week on resources for starting a small business in Boulder City. And so we would encourage anyone in Boulder City that's thinking about starting a business, or maybe they have started a business and they're looking for additional information from these groups, we'd encourage you to attend. The workshop will be held on Tuesday, March 3rd, starting at 5 p.m. at the Boulder City Library. One of the goals of the city's 2025 strategic plan is to implement a historic preservation plan for Boulder City. And so we are inviting citizens to attend a kickoff meeting for the Boulder City Historic Preservation Plan effort. The meeting will be held on Thursday, March 5th, and it will be from 6 to 8 p.m. at the multi-use building. And again, this is an opportunity for the community to provide input in the historic preservation plan. We have information for both these events on the city's website as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Luttrell.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Keegan Littrell, your Public Works Director. I'm not as elaborate as Mr. Mays is. I just wanted to make an announcement that we have 2 public workshops coming up for the draft facility study. The first one's going to be on March 3rd at 6 p.m. right here in Council Chambers. And then again the following morning, March 4th at 9 a.m. And we invite anybody from the public to come in. We're hoping to get a lot of feedback so we can improve on what we already have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll proceed to public comment. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited matters on the agenda for action. Each person will have up to 5 minutes to speak on a specific agenda item. And as always, we ask you to be civil and concise with your comments. Anyone wishing to speak in public comment? Mr. Bachhuber?
Good evening, council members, city staff. Pleasure to be here tonight. Name is Fred Bachhuber, 43-year resident of Boulder City, and it is my hope that within 10 or 20 years I'll be considered a native. As a proud volunteer with Lend a Hand of Boulder City, I wish to comment on Agenda 5C Resolution 7072, potentially amending the 5-year capital improvement plan for federal funding through 2020 that in part includes Lend a Hand's request for the renovation and use of building number 3 in ABC Park. According to federal requirements, Lend a Hand as a nonprofit is dedicated to servicing the elderly and handicapped is eligible for such funding. Recently, Lend a Hand celebrated its 30-year anniversary. Throughout its history, Lend a Hand has enjoyed the good graces of St. Christopher's Episcopalian Church and its parishioners in providing us with our present facilities. However, as we look forward to the next 30 years, the Lend a Hand staff and Board of Trustees have become concerned with our ability to continue service to the community. As population and need for additional services increases, we find that our present facility and number of volunteers will seriously limit our mission to the community. As such, Lend a Hand has submitted a proposal to the City of Boulder City requesting the renovation and use of building number 3 in ABC Park on a long-term basis. Indirectly, a new facility also may help in the effort to recruit additional volunteers. As Councilwoman Bridges pointed out a couple of months ago in a very appropriate manner, it would be good if Lend a Hand had bathroom facilities not encumbered by walkers and wheelchairs. Most citizens of Boulder City have a basic understanding of Lend a Hand and its service commitment, but they might not really appreciate the total depth of our activities. Volunteers change light bulbs for those who can no longer do so. We place garbage cans along the street for pickup. We do light housekeeping for the elderly and the handicapped. We read to the blind, provide companionship, and of course transport individuals to medical and dental appointments, the post office, bank, and do grocery shopping for those unable to leave their homes. However, some of our services are well beyond the ordinary, such as transporting people to 20 straight days of chemotherapy or radiation treatment. We also service 5 or 6 people with dialysis, which requires 3 visits per week, 4 hours for the treatment of their kidney problems. This is extraordinary, in my opinion. And I think this is a time when Lend a Hand volunteers touch the very humanity of people, touch at the soul of Boulder City. What is our reward? Well, I think that's a reasonable question. Our reward is recognizing that clients have an incredibly deep appreciation for what we do. They say, we could not get along without you. And I think that's the basic truth of what Lend a Hand does. They know that they are part of a generous, caring community. At this important juncture, where we desire and hope for another 30 years of service, Lend a Hand of Boulder City needs a lending hand in order to move forward into the next 30 years. Our city council and city staff can help to provide this lending hand. Thank you.
Thank you, and we appreciate all the work that your organization does here. Ms. DeShane?
Judy DeShane. I just have a couple of items that I noticed when I was going through the packet. I would like better information or explanation, I guess is more the word for it, on the wastewater sale or sale of wastewater under the new contract. Be interesting to know how come the price went down from 2/3 of potable water to only 1/2 of potable water. I am going to guess it might be that to help them or assist the business to stay in business because they won't have as big a water bill, the 2/3 would make it more expensive. But I don't, if that's the reasoning, I don't feel we need to do favors for private businesses that are not located in our city, which they are not. The other couple of items was questions on the community development block grants. I did talk to Michael about a little bit of it earlier, but it would be nice to know how far back we go to adjust these. Like this is adjusting one from basically 10 years ago. So I want to know how far back does the county or feds, whoever, allows us to go back and readjust monies. I think it would be interesting to know where it comes from. None of it probably makes a hill of beans different, other than my curiosity is killing me. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? Ms. Zimmerman?
Hi, I'm Letty Zimmerman, and I'm also on the board of Lend a Hand. I just want to not expand on what Fred said because it was very comprehensive and very insightful. I just want to thank everybody from the city who has stepped forward to help with bringing this proposal together. I think that it's a wonderful example of city and community working together for the good of the community, and the helping to instill the cooperation among the nonprofits as well. So I want to say thank you to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? All right, seeing no others, we will close public comment. Yeah, move for next item, approval of the regular agenda. Madam City Clerk? Mr. City Manager?
No changes.
Mr. City Attorney?
No changes.
Council, anyone wishing to make changes or comments? All right, we'll move then to the approval of the consent agenda. Oh, excuse me. Do we have a motion to approve the regular agenda then? I'll move to approve the regular agenda. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Now we'll move to approval of the consent agenda. Madam City Clerk?
Yes, Mayor, staff is requesting that items number 1B, item 2 and 3 be removed.
Okay, Mr. City Manager?
No additional changes.
Mr. City Attorney?
And no further changes.
Council, any changes or comments?
No.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion then for approval as amended.
I'll move for approval as amended.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Well, that shortens things up even more. Okay, we'll move to item number 4, presentation by Jill Lagan, CEO of the Boulder City Chamber of Commerce, on the results of the 2019 occupancy study.
Good evening. Thank you, council and staff. Glad to be here tonight. I promise this will only be about an hour. In July of 2018, the Boulder City Chamber of Commerce entered into an agreement with Count On It Business Consulting to conduct a one-year weekly occupancy study on hotels and motels in and servicing Boulder City. The goal was to evaluate an increase or decrease in number of guests staying in Boulder City during holiday and special event weekends. Count On It studied an average of 7 properties, both large and small, and represented 46.24% of the total number of local rooms. The total room average was about 325 rooms. He gathered the data in person each Monday morning This provided the most accurate reporting. Of overall findings were the following. Of the 13 events tracked, 9 showed an increase in occupancy the weekend of the event over the previous weekend. 2 events had a slight decrease in occupancy their weekend, and 2 stayed relatively the same as the previous weekend. It is also documented that on holiday weekends, we had 3 weekends see an increase over the previous non-holiday weekend, and 2 saw a decrease in occupancy over the previous weekend. We had an average occupancy rate of 78.8%, and the U.S. industry standard is 66.2%. One thing to note on the chart, when we see the biggest decrease in occupancy percentages from December 1st to mid-January, we are also keenly aware of the increase in retail sales during the shopping days leading up to the Christmas sales that rolls into a real lull for both hotels and motels, restaurants, and retail in January. What are the takeaways from this report? Many population explosions that happen with several special events provide the added economic impact our community needs in order to stay viable and remain growing into our role as a great destination in Southern Nevada. Something that stood out in the summary report was the idea that weekdays have a huge void for our properties, and that the idea of a small convention space can be supported by the data that our occupancy rates could truly thrive if utilized 7 days per week. A small conference center could be tasked with drawing attendees to conferences during weekdays and off-season to help add to the viability of our hotels and motels. Another noted standout fact was the number of extended stay venues that were running at almost 100% capacity. Might there be room in Boulder City's housing makeup to look at more apartments to accommodate those currently finding residency in motels? During the one-on-one conversations with the property owners each Monday, a rapport was developed and often discussions came about that led into suggested ideas on ways to help support our essential hotel-motel establishments. With the natural bleed over from the Vegas Valley during larger events, an example might be CES happening at the same time as a NASCAR event or Electric Daisy Carnival. We have the opportunity to reach out to our regional partners and develop relationships so that we can reach event participants prior to their arrival into the Southern Nevada area so that they might adequately plan to stay in Boulder City for their event in the Valley. It is also important to remember that some of our events here in Boulder City are not always open to the public, like some of the bike events in Boot Lake Canyon, the model airplane events on the dry lake bed, or even fishing tournaments on the lake. However, partnering with those producers is still something to keep in mind, since most of those event attendees do stay within our community and provide a solid economic impact. So with the completion of the occupancy study, we elected to not continue it for another year, but to take a more detailed approach of just one event and determine the event economic impact on retail and dining in Boulder City. So we will be entering into this more detailed survey in April and through the first weekend of May to give us a data-driven approach to understanding the economic benefits of Spring Jamboree on our community and the Chamber. Measuring the impacts of festivals and special events in Boulder City helps provide the city, chamber, and event producers with data about the effectiveness of the activities and programs carried out in the community. They encourage support for tourism and the events in our community. They help improve decision-making. They enhance tourism opportunities and future planning, and all increase revenue, employment, and income to the community. I'd like to publicly thank the hotels and motels that participated in the year-long study and look forward to continuing to support them in their valiant efforts. In the data gathering phase over the last 18 months, prior to the opening of I-11 through today, we have also been doing quite a bit of analyzing of the traffic counts as well as other data points we're studying. We first contacted the National Park Service to look at their reporting mechanisms and then employed their tools and methods. NDOT has the most valuable tracking mechanism with their installed units all over Boulder City. Using NDOT's Traffic Information System, or TRINA, online, we note that in 2018 is the only year's worth of stats available to date. The counter on the western end into Boulder City shows a daily average of 38,000 vehicles, or an annual total of 13.8 million visitors or vehicles. National Park Service uses the number 2 per vehicle for their calculation rate of total visitation. This would put our annual visitation at 27 million. Now we know that that isn't a count of just guests, but also includes residents and multiple trips in and out of the town by those and multiple trips by those in the same day. This same traffic count at the counter box just past the historic archway was at 11,400 vehicles per day in 2018, or an annual count of about 8 million people into the historic district. When the 2019 stats are finally available, I do expect this number to increase into the historic district, as we are hearing reports daily of businesses seeing increases anywhere from 16 to 46% in their fourth quarter reports of 2019 over 2018. Yes, there are businesses that have negative impacts from the traffic reduction in Boulder City, but I must admit, not at the rate I originally feared. In fact, today I was able to obtain the date from the Nevada Department of Taxation that Boulder City had a 6% increase in room tax for 2019. Nevada Commission on Tourism stated that they consider this a good rate of increase. Looking at these numbers, we have to ask ourselves, do we have what the guests are looking for? Do we offer great customer service while they are here? And do we look to provide the very best experience for those guests while they are in our community so that they will want to return again and again? Events and festivals are attractions that have drawing power and staying power. This means that they not only bring a new visitor, but they help keep visitors here in our city longer. Besides looking at occupancy and traffic stats, we also took a look at the makeup of our residents. The information was gleaned from the Las Vegas Perspective in partnership with Applied Analysis and is published annually by the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. For 2018, our official population was 16,050, with 47.3% of the population over the age of 55 and 15.9% of the population under 18. In looking at the years 2014 to 2018, we note that in that 5 years, we had an increase of 2.7% in the over 55 group and a decrease of 1.3% in the under 18. The reason we felt this might be worthy of discussion is for future planning. With the well-documented fact that the number of boomers retiring at rapid rates and in such large numbers, economists note that this is a group that will statistically prove the highest attrition all at the same time in the next 10 years. With this data and noting our decline in youth, we may want to look ahead at what type of programs and services we cultivate here in Boulder City in the years to come. We do an amazing job at providing the services needed for this large population now. Will those services still be the greatest need? Will we still be doing such a great job? What should we be looking at for our residents of the future? On a final comment, I wanted to share that the Events Advisory Committee has met several times and has quite a bit of momentum in its efforts. It is a committee made up of event producers, city staff, and a business owner and a private individual. Their goal is to determine a formula that can be used and reported on at the conclusion of each event, documenting the economic impact of the festival or special event in our community. We have been gathering research and findings from other communities that are currently reporting economic impacts of events and tourism for their regions. By the end of the second quarter of 2020, it's our intent to be back to present to the Council our collectively agreed upon formula, visitor questionnaire, and reporting summary that each event producer has agreed to implement into their events so that they may have a comprehensive annual report on their economic impacts. Thank you for allowing me to take the time to present the statistical information and conclusions, and thank you for recognizing the innumerable ways in which travel and tourism enhances and enriches our lives and strengthens our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Questions or comments from City Council? Councilman Adams?
Sure. And I think you touched on this, but it might have just went past me. Which hotels were included in this? Was it all hotels, just a small number? What was the...
Large and small, but I don't know. It was meant to be a very special survey so that nobody had to feel like their information was being shared amongst anybody else. So that information was only handled by Count On It. I truly don't know who those are. I was just told it's a variation of large and small properties.
Okay. Okay. And then I notice in here that we see the rooms occupied, but we also get the out-of-state percentage, so we can actually see the number of people that are coming from outside the state and in here. What can we do with those numbers? Why is it important that we have that information separated out?
So for me, it has it carries a lot of weight with Nevada Commission on Tourism. So most of our grants, we're required to go outside of a 100-mile radius to do our advertising and pull those people in. So those numbers mean a little bit more for my grant purposes, to having a better understanding of where people are coming from, if they're within the state, if they're out of state. But it also gives us a sense of what averages are, so that we can kind of do some more comparisons year over year.
Thank you.
The original intent also was to do this multi-year, but it was just too expensive, to be honest.
Councilwoman Hopkins?
I just wanted to comment that I think you did a fantastic job. It was very interesting, and I did make a statement to you about I couldn't figure out why the damn festival was more important than Christmas, but
I think Svet can tell you too.
Thank you for a job well done.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Bridges?
Yeah, thank you. That was wonderful, very informative. I'm curious if, were they able to break out of these numbers, and you did mention it, about people who permanently live in some of these hotels? I know some of them.
So that isn't in this particular chart. That information was gleaned in the executive summary that I received in the rest of this report. That was information that, like I said, as Dale was meeting with these independent property owners, he was able to develop a rapport with them, and in doing so, really connected with the ones that had the extended stays.
Right.
That's where he was able to determine that most of them were at 100% capacity most of the time. And that's where that information was just shared. And it's not to mean that we should do something, we shouldn't do something. It's just simply sharing that information.
Right, right. Because I know there are some of the hotels in town that they never have vacancies, and I figured they are the ones. They tend to be the ones where people are living full time.
They are, and the reason that we noted that is I pulled that out of the data because it really skewed our numbers. Mm-hmm. So it showed that we were at 100% occupancy all the time, and we looked great, but it wasn't accurate. So we pulled those out so that we would actually have true visitation numbers.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry. I'm at the end of the row, so my questions got answered already, but thank you, Jill.
You're welcome.
I had a couple of questions. One, kind of in line with what Councilman Adams had said. Do we know on the businesses, the hotels, motels that were surveyed, average number of rooms or?
So yes, that information would be available if we took that out of the study. We can get that information. It's not in this overall report, and I don't have that information because, again, it wasn't meant to be shared with us. All of the properties were promised that their personal information would not be released, and so I could go back and extrapolate that from the report that Dale did, but I don't have it personally.
Okay. And the methodology that was used then to collect the data was in-person or telephone interviews then?
No, in person. Unfortunately, we started off thinking we could just do it via email and somebody would just shoot us the numbers and he would be able to gather it. And it's also why it became kind of time-consuming and expensive on Dell's part, because he then had to physically go to each property. In fact, you can see 5 were reporting in August of last year, and then 6, and then 5. So it was kind of hit and miss. And so in order to make it a little bit more solid and legitimate, he physically went every Monday morning. So he had a standing meeting with each of them every Monday morning, and that's really where he developed quite a rapport with them and could kind of understand some of the issues and the concerns that they were having. Some of those also were in the executive summary. I didn't particularly talk about those tonight.
You mentioned also that you had been able to get some data out of the Global Economic Alliance data collection that they do on an annual basis.
Correct.
My concern always is, how do we collect the data and how do we view it over time? So it seems that the sales tax or room tax data is going to be something that is not dependent on anecdotal information or, you know, an owner who doesn't want to report numbers or something of that nature. So,
and that's where it became key for us today to just connect with Nevada Commission on Tourism. They were the ones that shared the 6% increase in 2019 on room tax revenue. That's not, I mean, we've been trying to get that information for quite some time. So today's connection was a real win. We intend on exploring that and doing a conference call with Michael and Rafi and myself with the research analysts that are doing that, pulling that data. So we're hoping to get some more information as well as our meeting potentially with LVCVA, and hope that we can make that happen too. The data that I'm pulling this from, that I reported on tonight, that is specifically from The Perspective. The Perspective is put out annually by Applied Analysis for LVGEA, and so that's where that information came from, and I do have data on that from, I think I've got a collection back from when I started 19 years ago.
okay. And again, I think those are the resources that we need to look to. I know in the past they haven't always been eager to share that with us. It seems that there's more eagerness. I know, you know, I've been working with city staff, hopefully to get something arranged, as you mentioned, for the Convention and Visitors Authority and R&R Partners, the advertising agency, to reach into that data. I'll quote Mayor March of Henderson again, that without data, all we have is an opinion, and I would much rather have the data than opinions, which are in abundance apparently. You had mentioned too an event center. Could you expand a little bit on?
No, we're just throwing that out there as it was something that was in the summary. There's a conversation about during the weekdays when the numbers obviously decline or decrease from occupancy. So weekends is what we were studying because that gave us the information about special events. But during the weekday, one of the things that was noted was weekdays are actually kind of open for a lot of opportunity, is how it was worded in the report. And so we thought that it was worth sharing with you tonight that information was gleaned from the report, just simply because we do need some other things during the weekdays that help keep them more viable, and it also helps the business community as well. So if that was a potential opportunity, if there was ever a community center or something that had a convention type of status, it would be advantageous for the hotel and motels in our community, as well as the other businesses.
Is there any effort or discussion among the business community to fund something like that?
So I do know at one point in time we did meet, this has been about 4 years ago, we did meet with a potential business owner that was looking at one of the hotel properties. It would have been a demolished, tear down, and new build, and at that time there was conversation about a small conference space, part of a new hotel. That did not come to fruition just based on they were not able to negotiate a good sell price. I do know that the Railroad Pass, they're getting ready to build the tower, and Holiday Inn Express is putting in some conference space in their lower level. I just recently got a drawing of it, and it's pretty impressive. And so you're looking at about 3,600 square feet, but it's more than what we have currently, unless all we really have access to is the pavilion. So having something that we can have breakouts. I would say we probably get at least 1 to 2 calls a month from entities that are looking to come and bring a corporate event. They're looking to be off the strip and away from the type of gaming activity, and they would love to have breakout sessions and be able to have a main session and then breakout sessions. For anybody that knows much about what we did for League of Cities when they were here in the annual event for Mike Piscini, it was kind of a nightmare trying to pull off all of the divisions of a tent and try to create little spaces so for breakout sessions, and tents all around the tent, trying to have little rooms and trying to air condition all of them. It was almost a nightmare, but it really was the only access we had for a small convention space, and so we kind of created it. So there have been times in the past that we could have definitely utilized it. There are definitely people who are interested. We could also court those corporate events for potentially having something something small like that. So there's an effort on behalf of all of us to put something like that together, and just that one business owner that I'm aware of. Collectively, I am sure that if I went to the different businesses and asked them if they felt like that would be an asset, they would probably all agree. Whether they're willing to contribute to that asset, I'm not sure.
Well, again, I think that's always the factor. You know, I certainly get people saying, you know, we should do more events here in Boulder City. You know, we do an average, I believe, about 6 large events.
It seems like 9,000 to me, but okay.
From your perspective, it probably does appear that way. And I guess the way I view it is, you know, I think this community has always welcomed the events that we have here. But, you know, when we look at something like that, it's like, well, okay, you know, we understand that when Art in the Park happens, you're probably not going to be spending a lot of time uptown. When some of these other events happen, same type of thing. But I also look at it too as, you know, I always wonder, you know, why are they asking me what the businesses want to do? I think it would be incumbent on the businesses to say, you know, we have this event or that event that we would like to explore, and then, you know, come to city council, city staff, and discuss that type of thing. So, you know, we do government. That's what we're supposed to be doing. I understand that the businesses enjoy these events, or at least prepare for them. I'm not sure that they necessarily enjoy every one of them because it keeps them very busy. But the statistics, too, that you're finding for things like sales tax revenue and all of that, you know, many of us were fearful when the I-11 bypass opened what the town would look like after that. And as you mentioned, there are a couple of businesses that have suffered as a result of that. But when we look overall at things, we see rising sales figures, all of that. So I'm not sure what the answer is as far as how to market Boulder City. But I do believe that the reason people want to come here is because of the charm of our community. And do we run the risk of losing that if we start to look at the Las Vegas model of, you know, conventions and that sort of thing? You know, there are things like the golf courses that might be underutilized here. So, you know, maybe Railroad Pass will be able to work that into their plan. I don't know, but it does seem like there are opportunities here. I'm just not sure that the government is responsible for making all of those things happen for people.
I definitely agree, and I think you're spot on. When it comes to some of those different events, different ideas, and it seems like I get hit with a lot of ideas constantly, and I do wish I could say, why don't you go do it? So I do understand that. I think I'm going to answer a little bit of a couple questions that you had brought up in there. So I think one of our main issues is we just don't have anything that we can gate. So when Svet was doing Damn Short Film Fest, the ability to be able to really track and count and then survey the people that were coming and going because there was a door. That's not something that we really have for special events when they're in the park. I think that's one of our biggest detriments is that we really can't get a good gauge of what our numbers are. And so by having some type of a gated event, a gated a community center of some sort where you could have events like that, I think being able to gauge some of that information could be helpful. It also allows for some of the communities, nonprofits in the community that currently stay away from having an event or a fundraiser. They worry about an outdoor event and, you know, the weather, the wind, some of those other issues. So it could potentially open up some opportunities for some more fundraising for them. I do get where you're coming from. Is it the government's job to handle a conference or event center? I think the only reason people suggest that is because it's done in so many other communities, but I can see a private business also having that opportunity. I think it's a fabulous idea, and we have recommended it a couple different times. I do know that there is a group right now that is looking at that idea and are considering it, but I don't know how far they've gotten as far as property. So I do understand, and we get that it's not the government's job, but we also are grateful for the partnership. And I think, too, a lot of this occupancy study came from our conversations earlier when you were still on just a councilman, that there was a concern about the return on the investment of the city in dollars for the market marketing for the special events. And so we couldn't answer it. We really couldn't tell you. We knew the businesses enjoyed having added people come to town in the mini explosions that we were kind of talking about, those little population explosions, but we didn't have anything documented. And so between the events committee trying to start documenting a visitor impact on an event type basis and gathering that on an annual basis to present, and then potentially having some of these other numbers from like the occupancy study, we can see that there were quite a few events that really were able to benefit from that. So I think we're just trying to, without going to an expanded, very expensive consultation or having a consulting firm like Applied Analysis do a true impact study for us, we're doing the best we can with all of our little bits and pieces.
And again, I think we're fortunate here in Southern Nevada that because of Las Vegas, there is a lot of emphasis on studying that data, finding out where visitors come from, how much they're spending, how long they're staying, all those types of things. Well, that's collected on a countywide basis, and so that pool of information is out there, and hopefully we're going to be able to find ways to leverage that data and make those determinations. I know one of the concerns that's been expressed, and they're hopeful that the new slogan, what happens in Vegas only happens here, is to rekindle some interest from the Southern California area, which that market has been tailing off a little bit. And that impacts us, I believe, as well because of Lake Mead visitation. So I think there's a lot in there. Again, I would like to see the business community come up with some ideas of what they think might work without having to ask the 16,000 people of Boulder City to do that for them and allow them to benefit from that. If they believe there's that demand there, then, certainly I think the city would be willing to look at how we can help, but we can't keep putting burdens on 16,000 people when we're doing things like raising utility rates and things like that. So again, I think there are opportunities out there. I too appreciate the work that you've done on this, and hopefully that makes a foundation for us being able to get even more information and help the businesses target their customers.
Right. Well, thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Lagan. Okay, we'll move then to item number 5 for possible action, matters pertaining to the Community Development Block Grant Program. And this involves a total of 3 resolutions. Mr. Mays.
Based on an interlocal agreement between Clark County and the City of Boulder City, the city receives approximately 3% of the Community Development Block Grant funds that the county receives on an annual basis. Community Development Block Grant funds are federal dollars that are received from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they are utilized to benefit low to moderate income individuals, the elderly, and disabled citizens of communities across the country. Annually, the city receives approximately $230,000, of which 85% is required to be used for capital projects. And that's the purpose for tonight's City Council consideration of these budgets is related to capital projects. Mayor, as you mentioned, you have 3 resolutions before you this evening. I just wanted to highlight briefly what the purpose is for each of those resolutions. This is required by Clark County for the city to adopt the 5-year capital improvement plans. And the first one is for fiscal years 11 through 15. And these are for projects that have already been completed. This just finalizes what was spent. And the other thing that's an important consideration with respect to Community Development Block Grant funds is the fact that similar to our RDA grant program, the city doesn't receive this money annually from the county. The county holds on to it, and as projects are completed, the city submits the expenses for that and are reimbursed. And so that's how these funds are allocated to the city. So in that first 5-year plan, the expenditures went to projects including Elm Street retaining wall and Lakeview Park improvements. The second fiscal year period for fiscal years 16 through 20, which ends later this year, we have identified in the 5-year plan approximately $632,000 for the rehabilitation of Building 3 in ABC Park for Lendahan. In addition to that, approximately $26,000 that would support the senior center's planned capital improvements. We met with the senior center, and they provided us an estimate that over the next 5 years, they would spend approximately $175,000 in capital improvements. And so you will see that with the final 5-year capital improvement plan, fiscal years 21 through 25, we have budgeted $150,000, the remainder of the dollars, for the senior center improvements. In addition to that, the St. Jude's expansion that has been before the council previously with the additional homes for children, within that 5-year plan, we've identified approximately $650,000. With the resolutions and the backup material that you've received, you can see that this is not set in stone. This is, there's the opportunity in the future, as we have a better understanding of the needs of each of the eligible projects, we would come back before the City Council to revise the budgets, at least the budgets for 16-20 and 21-25. We're done with fiscal years 11 through 15. In addition to that, it requires that there is an interlocal agreement between the city and the entities that would be utilizing these funds that spells out in greater detail how these funds would be used. So this is really just the initial step in the process that's required by the county for the City Council to adopt the 5-year capital improvement budgets. And so, as you mentioned, you have the 3 resolutions for your consideration this night, as well as a required public hearing. And with that, I can answer any questions.
All right. Questions or comments?
I have a question.
Councilwoman Hoskins?
Yes, and I think I addressed this with you yesterday about some of the tables show the ADA pool project. And I know you weren't here during those years. I don't know if maybe Roger could answer this, but there's quite a few dollar amounts on here for the ADA pool projects, but you know what any of those were?
Yes, I do. We had a wading pool that wasn't handicap accessible, and so part of the project was to put in a ramp so we can get wheelchairs into the waiting area of the swimming pool for the handicapped kids. And so they put a ramp into the facility, and it had to be ADA approved, obviously, a 4% ramp, and also into the pool itself, so you can get into the enclosure. And once you get into the enclosure, then you can get into the actual swimming pool. And so the majority of that was for that.
Okay, and it was mentioned yesterday in the briefing that we don't have that, we can't use HUD for that anymore. Did something change along the way?
What we're finding with HUD guidelines, and this is through ongoing conversations with Clark County, is that HUD has tightened eligible projects. So like the pool, in the past, the city was able to utilize community development block grant funds to improve accessibility at intersections throughout the community. However, what HUD has now said is that they will no longer support those types of community-wide projects or facilities that support the entire community. It has to be for dedicated, eligible individuals in the areas I had mentioned before. So we wouldn't be able to use that for that project in the future.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? A question that had been asked in public comment was, the first resolution is to go back and make adjustments to the 2011 through 2015 capital improvement projects. Is there a reason for that? I mean, we're 5 years beyond that period of time.
That is to provide to the county the final numbers as reflected with the actual costs. And this is how the county tracks that information.
Were there projects that extended beyond 2015 that were still being funded with that money?
No, those projects would be completed within that period.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Mr. Mays before we open the public hearing? Councilman Adams?
Yeah, just to clarify, when we were talking about money coming from HUD and then where this money is going, we are not getting this money directly from them. It's actually coming through the county. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so, when we're talking about getting this funding available, because we ourselves aren't necessarily eligible directly through HUD, and that's why we have to go through Clark County, right? Is that how my understanding? Yeah.
The city, through the interlocal with Clark County, has the ability to decide how to disperse those funds locally. Otherwise, if we didn't have this interlocal agreement with Clark County, because the community is not a population of 50,000 or larger, we're not an entitlement community. And so therefore, entities or eligible projects within Boulder City would have to apply directly to the county.
And then when you talk about the dollars being reimbursed, this isn't money that the city is spending. We're just helping to facilitate. Is that correct? That reimbursement to those spending the money? Is that?
Well, it depends on the project. So, for example, with the $632,000 that's being proposed with the Lend a Hand renovation, that would be money that would be spent by the city and then reimbursed by the county.
Okay. Right, that's it.
Councilwoman Folden?
Of any of these projects, were any of the funding denied by the county? Where the city paid something and then, I think there was one project that we had to actually repay the county.
Yeah, not denied, but because approximately $7,000 was spent on engineering costs for a project that the city did not move forward with, we are now required to reimburse that back to the county. However, the county is going to put that back into our 5-year capital plan, so it can be reused again.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify a little bit, we propose the projects first, and the county approves or disapproves of those proposals. So we should know, as long as we abide by the proposals that we made, of what the county is going to reimburse for and what they may not.
Correct. Our staff is working very closely with the county staff. They're aware of the proposed items identified in these 3 budgets.
And one other question I had with regard to the capital projects, you mentioned for seniors and handicap, some of that is also available for low to moderate income areas?
That is correct. So if you have a census block, the city and all over the country is divided into census blocks, and if the residents within that census block, if over 50% are considered low to moderate income, which basically is below 80% of the median income for that area, then that census block would be able to benefit from projects, say, for example, street improvements within that census block. Unfortunately for Boulder City, we now only have one census block that is eligible, and that is south of Nevada Way along Elm Street. And it consists of private development, and so those aren't eligible. We were able to take advantage of the Elm Street retaining wall, which was a public project in that area, but that has been the extent. And so really for Boulder City, the opportunities exist with entities, projects that serve the elderly and the disabled.
All right. Councilwoman Folden?
So I just wanted to clarify something then, that although we may not have a lot of census tracts, we can determine household per household on individual households to do something like a housing rehab if that household met the low or moderate household income.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Mays. We'll go ahead and open this for public hearing on the three. Are we able to do the three resolutions at one time? All right. Anyone wishing to speak on the three resolutions before us? Mr. Fan?
My name is Glenn Fan. Good evening, council and city staff. I just kind of got a question. I don't understand all this stuff real well. So it just, Mr. Mays reported there's spend up to like $650,000 on the St. Jude Ranch project, for the expansion that they're going to be working on. I think that's a wonderful project. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not sure how that falls into, like the lend a hand. Well, that's putting money towards a city park. That kind of everybody kind of has access to the city park. I'm just not sure how. I might just be stupid old me. I don't know, but how that's because that's kind of it's kind of a private area. The St. Jude's. It's really not a public area. Like fixing the sidewalks and stuff around town through these grants. I mean, that's kind of public. So I'm just a little confused on how that works. Don't get me wrong. I think that's a wonderful project, and St. Jude's does good work. So I'm not bashing. I'm just trying to understand a little bit better. That's kind of my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? Or excuse me, public hearing? All right, seeing no others, we will close the public hearing then. Any questions or comments by council members? Councilwoman Bridges?
Yeah, if it would be okay, I'd like to get an explanation of that. I sort of understand it, that it's different than a privately owned mobile home park. But how does St. Jude's differ from lend a hand leasing a building in a park?
So with St. Jude's, they're serving the larger community by helping at-risk children. And so that's a public benefit, and that's why that would be an eligible project. Lend a Hand is serving the seniors of the community, the entire community. It's not improving the park per se, but including the improvements of a specific building that will serve those seniors. In the interlocal agreement between the city and Lend a Hand, one of the stipulations that will be required is that they can't use the building for other purposes. They couldn't lease it out to somebody that wanted to just have a public event there, because it has to serve seniors.
Okay. So it's a matter of mission, basically, the mission of St. Jude's versus the actual land itself.
Correct.
Okay.
I think, too, that the fact that they are nonprofits is also a factor in that it's not private ownership, it's owned by a nonprofit. Is that correct?
Well, again, because with and maybe the distinction with a private development, it's not a private development that explicitly is serving low to moderate income people. Anybody could rent or own within a private development. But with St. Jude's, with Lend a Hand, those are exclusively serving a certain community. And yes, being a nonprofit also is an important consideration, the factor.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, we will take these one at a time then. Resolution 7071 is the update or the amendment of the capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2010/11 through 2014/15. Do we have a motion for that?
I move to approve 7071 as written.
Do you have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the resolution passes. Next is Resolution 7072, a resolution of the City Council of Boulder City, and this is to amend the capital improvement plan for fiscal year 2015/16 through 2019/20. Do we have a motion for approval?
Mayor, I move to approve Resolution 7072.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the third is Resolution 7073. This is a resolution approving an application for the city's 5-year capital improvement plan for fiscal years 2020 through 2024.
I move to accept resolution number 7073.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you, Mr. Mays, for the presentation. We'll now move to item number 6, matters pertaining to ballot questions to be presented to voters during the 2020 November general election.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Before you tonight are 3 proposed ballot questions that would, if approved by the council, be presented to the voters during the 2020 November general election. Ever since the voters' rejection of last year's ballot question, where the voters were asked to issue up to $40 million in general obligations bond, which were backed or secured by property taxes, the City Council and staff and certainly members of the ad hoc pool committee have been working diligently to find alternate funding sources for an aquatic center. At the council's last regular council meeting, the city attorney's office was directed to draft 3 ballot questions pertaining to the funding sources for the aquatic center. Those 3 resolutions are before you as resolution number 7074, which would place a question on the ballot for voter approval to use $7 million from the Capital Improvement Fund for the purpose of funding an aquatic center. Resolution number 7075 would be seeking voter approval for the annual transfer of $1 million from the Capital Improvement Fund to a pool reserve for the purpose of establishing sufficient funds for the construction of an aquatic center. And that transfer would have a sunset clause that would be effective through December 31st, 2029, or at such time the construction of the aquatic center is complete, whichever comes first. And finally, resolution number 7076 would be a ballot question requesting voter approval to reclassify the formula for the proceeds from the land sale of the lands that are adjacent to the Boulder Creek Golf Club, also known as Track 350, with 10% to be used for public safety capital needs and 90% to be used for the city's aquatic center. And so with that, Mr. Mayor and members of council, it is staff's recommendation that the council approve these 3 resolutions for these ballot questions to go forward to the 2020 November general election. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. As the chair of that ad hoc pool committee, one of the things that we've done, and I believe now we've had a total of 4 meetings for that committee, we've come across the conundrum, I guess, of we're in a position to identify the cost of this project. And at our last meeting, what was done there was to identify the need to have a consultant or 2 consultants, one to examine the current state of the pool and determine if it is repairable, what that cost would be, and if the cost is justified to do repairs rather than proceed with a new project. The second consultant, and it may be the same firm, but second need is to identify those elements that the committee has already discussed as being desired, or at least we feel necessary for such a project, but at this time we don't have a firm price on that. We've looked at the plans that were done previously and tried to subtract things out, coming up with a rough estimate, but we still don't have anything that would give us something substantial as far as what the value of the project is. That's very concerning to me, to go forward with ballot questions saying to the voters, well, approve all of this stuff and then we'll figure out how much the project's going to cost. We do have a couple of options here as far as the ballot questions are concerned, and that is we can do this now, and as I say, I have substantial concerns about going to the voters before we have a project to propose in November of this year, or we have a municipal election approximately 7 months later in June of 2021, which hopefully we'd be able to have accurate information, reliable information established for what the cost of the project might be, or an estimate on what repairs to the existing facility might cost. So I have concerns about going forward with these ballot questions. Madam City Clerk, you had provided some information today, I believe, on what the county election department has said is the last date to withdraw the question. Could you state that information?
Yes, we had discussed this at the last meeting, and the date is the same as it would be to submit the questions and arguments. I've never submitted the questions and arguments that late because it's so much work for them. And so if they moved forward and work had been done, such as translation services, or they used their staff and then subsequently they were removed from the ballot, we would have to pay for staff time and any services provided up until that point. But they could be removed up until the 3rd week of July.
So approximately 5 months, 5.5 months before the election. And in addition to the work that the county election department would do as far as translation services and that sort of thing, your task would also be to get the ballot question committees together to write the pro and con answers on these ballots, do the the responses to each.
It's the council's job to appoint the committees, of course, and then I work with those committees to provide materials to them so they can write their arguments. And then really what my job is just kind of bring it all together, make and fact check their arguments and rebuttals. And so, yes, that is very, very time consuming, not just for me, but for the volunteers. And so I would just say, we always appreciate somebody's willingness to write these, because it can be and I've heard from several volunteers, it could be very intimidating, especially if you don't have experience like serving on a committee or commission. You're kind of coming in just as a citizen. So it would be we would hope that we wouldn't waste anybody's time and efforts if it wasn't going to move forward.
Okay. And I had also had a question at the last council meeting regarding the redirection or rededication of any potential proceeds from the sale of Track 350. Currently, Mr. City Attorney, that those proceeds have already been voted on by the citizens. Could you cover that question, previous question?
Yes, the 10% is the same. That formula remains the same to be used for public safety capital needs. The prior formula, the remainder of those proceeds were to go to retire the bonds with respect to the golf course. Those bonds were retired in 2015, and any remainder for any other city debt. And so while that remains in effect, what this ballot question would be asking is the voters do you want to change that formula? With the sale of Track 350, for that 90%, instead of being used for debt that's already been retired or any other existing debt, would you rather use that for the funding of an aquatic center? And so if the council moves forward with that, the approval of that ballot question, and the voters will be asked to reclassify that formula, specifically the 90% and how that's going to be utilized. And if approved, then that's how it would be utilized.
And the city does currently have debt, is that correct?
I believe that there is existing debt on the raw water line that was refinanced by this council recently.
Yes, there was a ballot question back in June to allow the council to proceed with a refinancing of the debt that was outstanding.
Right.
And as I recall, the amount refinanced was somewhere around $23 million. So we're probably still right around $23 million in the hole right now.
Yes, it's my understanding with that refinancing that we would have to wait 2 years before we could prepay any of that debt, but that's a debt that the city has.
Okay. All right. With that, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions from council. Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Mayor. Over the last few weeks, I've taken the time to talk to a number of residents regarding the pool, in specific these questions. At least in the conversations that I have been having, a lot of people do have a lot of confidence in them. They certainly support this direction. I'd like to especially thank city staff, the finance department, for a lot of the work that went in here, because I do feel it addresses a lot of the big concerns that people had with the 2019 ballot questions. The big one is taxes, right? Everybody might want a state-of-the-art new facility, yet we don't all necessarily have the means to reach into our own pockets to pay for that. If these questions were approved, it does allow for a plan for us to start to secure funding so that we don't have to rely so much on the taxpayer, so that we don't have to burden them. If we could be so fortunate, we might not have to burden them at all. The other big concern with those ballot questions in 2019 was that it was not specific to what recreation project that those dollars would go to. These questions, again, are very specific that these would have to be spent on an aquatics center, whether it is to update, maintain, bring up to code the current one, or to potentially construct a new aquatic center. So I think that speaks to both of those concerns. Unfortunately, there is still that underlying concern that we don't still have a full grasp on what the scope of work would be and what that cost, what that price tag is associated with it. So I guess my first question for Mr. Luttrell, Public Works, you know the pacing, the schedule of the current ad hoc pool committee, where we're at with council. When do you think we will have that information by? Will it be within this year? Could it potentially be in the beginning of next year, in the next few months? What do you think that's going to look like?
Currently, We have the RFP drafted for assessing the existing facility, just working out the last little kinks of that, and then it should be available for the RFP for hiring a consultant for coming up conceptual design and a cost estimate for a new pool. If I'm understanding correctly, we're bringing a draft back to the ad hoc pool committee at the next meeting and working through that with some of the committee members that's bringing additional information. Once we get that feedback, we could probably have that out on the street within a week or so. Typically, you put that out for about 4 weeks, and then we'd bring people in for interviews, bring to council for approval. You're looking at 6 weeks, 8 weeks for that process, and then depends on how in-depth we want those renderings. I'm sure they could have it done in a few months, or it could be much longer than that.
And so I guess that kind of brings me to another question when it comes to relation to timeline here. There's been conversation or talk about potentially postponing these questions to the June 2021. Here we are now in February talking about ballot questions that will have to be addressed in November. So that's 8 months down the road. What does the timeline look like if we're going to be asking these same questions, that down the line? Is it after the next election? Is it upcoming? Is it December? I think that was what it was for the 2019.
Yes, the timeline is much more condensed on a municipal election because we don't have that stretch between a primary and a general. And so we always start the discussion in December usually, sometimes the end of November. And then the questions with full arguments and rebuttals have to be submitted 60 days in advance of the general. So that's in April. So you'd be talking about it in December, and it moves very quickly after that.
Okay, so we kind of, depending on how long it takes for us to get the specifics down on price tag, potential scope of work, we could be still working in a very small time frame to even get the questions on the ballot in 2021. Let's, I guess, kind of switch gears here a little bit for finance. Let's say, let's move forward 3-4 years down into the future. We've already approved all of these questions in November. We've got together about the roughly $25 million that we would hope to have by here. But through a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck, we now have a pool project that's going to cost us somewhere between $15 to $20 million. What happens with any additional revenues that we might have brought into this fund that aren't necessarily needed to spend for the project?
Depends on where they came from. So if they're voter approved funds, they'd have to go back to the voter approved fund and be up for vote again. So it just depends on where they came from.
So they wouldn't necessarily be stuck in limbo. No. They would just have to be, so for instance, the capital improvement project, they would have to be, they would still stay in the capital improvement fund. They wouldn't have to be voted again just to get back in there and not be spent on
No, they would just go back.
Just to take it like one little step further, so the $7 million expenditure from the capital improvement fund, if all $7 million wasn't used, it would stay there. But the $1 million transfer out, Angela, so that if it was transferred out every year and it sat in the fund that's codified by the council, the pool item is a sub-fund of the extraordinary maintenance and expense for capital. Mm-hmm. So that money could be used for capital, or would it stay in the pool fund and you'd put it back in the capital improvement fund? I just wanted to...
We kept changing the way the question was worded. So originally it would have stayed in the extraordinary repairs and expense fund, and I got to reread the question on how it was worded. If it says aquatic reserve or, sorry.
Pool reserve fund.
So it could stay there and be used for pool items. It couldn't be used for anything else because it says pool reserve.
So we would want to see that money essentially spent first before we reached into the capital improvement funds to.
Yes.
Councilmember, I'd like to just make a clarification, and I'm going to be looking forward to my Public Works Director. When you asked the question about timelines for capital projects and at what point do we get to a number, that's a little difficult to say because there's really different steps in the whole capital design process that gives you different numbers. So with the previous project, you got a conceptual design. Conceptual design gives you about 20 to 30% of what, you would expect that the project may or may not get to. What we would be looking at as I look at my Public Works Director is, in essence, conceptual design to outline the major issues that we want to have reviewed and just at a high level come up with some general dollar amounts of either repairing or taking a look at the new, preferred amenities that you're looking for a new pool. From that point, then you need to expend dollars to actually go into a full design in which you go out and you get design of the actual project that gets you to about what we call the 90 percentile. When you get to 90%, that means that is just about ready to go out on street as an RFP to actually compete for bids. The 30 percentile, which is really the number that you're likely going to get, which is much of what happened with the first iteration, is a planning dollar amount. It is not the absolute this is it, because what will happen is during the actual engineering design process, they're going to get into miles of wire, piping, soils, all sorts of things that will either verify the numbers and oftentimes increases the potential cost, because as they start to do testing of the soils and where you're looking at and whatnot, that may bring some additional costs that were not thought of during the initial conceptual design phase. So I want to make sure that it's clear to the council that if you're looking for a number, the first sets of numbers that you're going to get is the conceptual design numbers. Those are not the final numbers. The final numbers could be substantially different. It could be 10, 15, 20% higher. It could be roughly around the same number. Much depends on, how well and how deep they dived into the conceptual design portion of that. And I want to say, be clear about that, because the same advice that we provided to the previous council is to take it from the conceptual design to take it to the final design, the 90 percentile. That's where you're going to have to determine to expend some substantial dollars to actually design that project. Typically, a project of this magnitude, whether you're going to do a major refurbishment or a rehab of the new pool, or a new facility, typically it's going to run you 10 to 15% of what the actual cost of that facility will likely look like. So when we're looking at a pool, say a new pool aquatic center that roughly will be $2 million, you're looking at a potential design of that, $20 million. You're looking at potentially you could be expending up to dollars or more in design costs. I would caution the council that do you want to spend that kind of money without the community's input in supporting a substantial project like that? So in other words, committing to spending $2 million to design something if the community has not already given its blessing to go forward with such a project. It's the chicken and egg kind of scenario, because uniquely Boulder City has a different way of how we approach capital projects versus all other communities. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. And I wanted to spend some time explaining that to the new council, that The first set of numbers is not your final. In order to get to the final numbers, you're going to have to expend some significant dollars, and I would be very cautious in recommending for you to expend, significant dollars to design something unless the community has in fact said we want, that type of a project.
I'd just like to kind of comment. Again, I am the only member of the current council that was there previously, and something went seriously wrong with that process last time. The design firm came in with a number, and when the research that I've done, the people I've spoken to, when you show them that number and what the project was, they thought, that's probably pretty close. But then something very odd happened after, and that was that millions of dollars were added on to that price, so that a $21 million project that others in that business thought, that seems like a fair ballpark number, ballooned to $37 million. And when that was shown to these people, usually I didn't get any comment. They just turned away because they wouldn't even consider that as being a reasonable number. And what we've already seen is there was a $40 million figure put out there last time. The price had ballooned up through all these add-on costs to $37 million, and it wasn't justifiable for most folks. And to say that we're going to spend money in the design phase before we have public approval, I don't think that's part of the discussion. The discussion is, when do we ask for that public approval? So I don't think that is a valid part of the discussion that, we have to have that approval before we can spend the money, or we start spending the money before we have the approval. I don't think we should ever spend the money until we have the approval. It's when do we seek that approval? And I think that we are at a place where we're talking about a 6 to 7 month difference in when we do that, and that seems to fit within the window to be able to get some type of price put on this. These design costs that keep getting tossed around of $2.5 million for design costs, we're not building a rocket ship here. This isn't SpaceX. We're not designing something that no one's ever done before. These designs are fairly routine. Pools get built all the time. So I don't know where we come up with these figures. And again, honestly, the people I've spoken to, they've never seen figures like that for design costs. So I think that's an important factor to keep in mind is we're not looking to jump the gun. We're not looking to take a bunch of money and put it into a project that's never going to be built. We're just talking about the time frame that we do these things. So I think that's an important part of it. Mr. Adams?
Thank you. So as a member of the ad hoc pool committee, I have voiced a number of times my concerns with moving too fast on a ballot question that I wasn't sure that we had the confidence of the public with. That being said, the concern is that, where do we know how this money is going to be spent? What is that project, right? We are still having those discussions. But that is kind of the purpose of the ad hoc pool committee that we have. We now have a process put in place that allows for that process to be incredibly transparent. I don't know how much more transparent we could get with how we are going to arrive to the numbers, to the scope of the work, than the process that we have in place. If there are ideas for how to make it more transparent, I'd love to hear them, and maybe they can be implemented. But it is really important, and these, not everybody can attend those meetings, but they can also be viewed online through YouTube. It really is a transparent process in trying to get to these numbers to figure out so that the community can be on board and understand where that conversation is going. We don't know what the future holds. We never will. Are people, will people have the support for these questions right now at this time? Maybe not. Like I said, the people I've talked to personally, and this is just my experience, they could support this, and they do believe that this is the right way that we could move forward. Would they like to have a little bit more information? Of course, I think everybody always would. But one of the things that we do know that is not going to change is, regardless of what the scope is, whether it is to repair the current facility and bring it up to code currently, or to get a new facility, we are going to need access to funds that the city does not have access to without going to the voters for approval. I worry that, postponing this, too much, we still, like I said, might find ourselves in the same situation come December, where we are still trying to hash out these numbers. I would hope that we're not there, but if we're not there, it also means that we've gotten those answers well before November, where this ballot question will be up for people to make those considerations. When I'm looking at these three ballot questions, for me, I think the most important ones to at least start getting us on the right path are the Resolution 7075, which is to transfer $1 million from the capital improvement into a fund that just helps us start to build it, and then Resolution 7076, which is to reclassify the formula for the sale of Track 350, because again, this helps us to at least get that, at least some sort of savings going. With Resolution 7074, just the initial $7 million, that's going to be there, regardless of whether we get the voters' approval now or we get it in that June. So if it were me, and I, personally, I think I am confident that we could move forward, that this does answer a lot of the concerns that the initial ballot questions did not. That's my personal opinion. I think that we would have the approval of the voters. However, I think to be safe, if you wanted to be safe, Resolution A, that $7 million, it's going to be there in the capital improvement funds. We won't have access to it without their approval. So we can vote on that in 2021, but, without a doubt, we are going to need money to start setting aside for this pool. We are running against the clock. For me, I think it would be a disservice for us to not at least move forward with at least Resolution 7075 and 7076. But I will get off my soapbox and allow the rest of council to comment.
Well, I'd just like to point out that, certainly the work that staff did, Diane Pelletier, the finance director, and her staff have done on this, certainly found ways to do this where a, quote, tax increase was not necessary. That was obviously a problem for a lot of folks with the last ballot question. But I think we're giving an overly rosy review of this reclassification of proceeds from Track 350. Currently, that money is supposed to be used to pay off existing debt. We've already talked about the existing debt being the raw water line that's somewhere in the neighborhood of $23 million. I think that some folks are going to start to realize that they're paying about $300 a year because of that debt. The service charge on the water is currently $37.50, which is an increase, substantial increase from what it had been just a few years ago, about $5 a month. And that the reason for that increase is because the utility fund was separated out into 4 separate funds, one of them being the water fund, and all of the debt for the raw water line was placed within that water fund. I believe that's an appropriate thing to do. But then to pay that debt, that's why the connection fee, the service charge, went from that about $5 a month to $37.50. So people are paying that debt. And the reason for the sale of that land was to alleviate some of that cost to the taxpayers. So I know this sounds like, whoa, this is a great and wonderful thing, but people will start to figure out that there is, it's always the case, there is no magic money. It doesn't just suddenly appear. This money was supposed to go to pay for that raw water line debt, so that we could reduce that connection fee, that service charge that people pay each month. Because again, as I say, they're paying about $300 a month within that fee. Based on, I believe it's 27 something a month for the service charge on the, for the debt.
A good chunk of that is just Southern Nevada Water Authority. A good chunk of that is Southern Nevada Water Authority, nothing to do with the debt. So it's the fee we pay for the drought and the other Southern Nevada Water Authority charges that they charge all.
As I recall, there were 3 components to that $37.50. There's a very small amount that goes for servicing the water line. Then there's another amount, which is the SNWA amount.
Which is about $15.
Okay, and so the remaining amount is the payment on the raw water line?
The service fee, it was never determined that it was a payment on the raw water line.
Well, without that money, that fund would not be able to pay the debt that's been assigned to it. Is that correct?
Without that service fee, well, the rate study is currently analyzing how that service
Well,
fee is being
let's not
calculated.
talk about future rates. Right now, without that money being tacked on there, we would not be meeting the debt obligations on the raw water line.
Without any service fee, well, we are getting $1 million from the infrastructure tax that goes to pay for that service fee. So I wouldn't say that we wouldn't be able to pay it if we reduce that service fee.
Okay, but you're talking about other money coming in from some.
But it's the money in the water fund. Like, the water fund would still be able to pay its debt with reducing its service fee, at least slightly. Maybe not eliminate it, because we are paying Southern
So if
Nevada
we
Water.
went back to $5 a month, which
Well,
is where it was a few years ago,
We wouldn't be able to pay Southern Nevada Water Authority.
well, we wouldn't be able to pay the raw water line debt either if we were back down to that amount.
We couldn't make any of our obligations if we were back down to that amount.
Okay.
Mayor, may I just point out something I think it's important to consider? In 2016, the voters authorized the city to use capital improvement fund money specifically for the debt service on the raw water line debt. That authority has already been provided.
That helps with that payment, but as I recall, the payment is around $2.3 million a year on the debt. So it doesn't pay the debt, it just helps pay the debt.
I don't think it's currently being used to pay that debt because it's coming out of the utility fund. But I'm just saying, when we're talking about reclassifying the formula to use for the pool versus the raw water line, we already have approval to use capital improvement fund money for the raw water line that was granted in 2016.
But it's not sufficient to pay the annual debt, the amount that the voters approved.
It didn't, the question doesn't put an amount on it. It just said, shall the city be authorized to expend funds from the capital improvement fund as they become available to pay the debt service? So that would be, I mean, I guess the
As
debt
needed.
service is 2.2 million.
So if we wanted to, we could take 2.2 million.
Exactly.
Which is, I believe, everything.
No, it's about $4 million that's being taken in a year without land sales. And we're only allowed to spend $1.5 million a year.
Without voter approval.
Yes.
Okay. Well, and again, we can talk about the magic money and how we can move stuff around. I think the other part is, Councilman Adams had brought up, well, we got to start building up money now. Well, okay. We will be getting more money in that should be uncommitted over the next 2 years from solar projects that will come online. They don't start paying their full lease amounts until those projects come online. So there are ways, other than the plan that the finance department came up with. And again, I compliment the work that they did. I think it was an excellent package they put together, but it's certainly not the only answer to this. We can start setting money aside for that within a period of time that would start to fund that, and money that then would not be encumbered elsewhere. If the pool project never came about, that money could be used elsewhere. So I know that, boy, this is a great plan and folks really like it. Well, what they really like is the component that's been removed is an increase in property taxes. That's what they really like about it. But I can assure you, as this goes forward, people will start looking at where this money comes from. And again, government money always comes from somewhere, and once you spend it in one place, you're not going to be able to spend it in another. So as great as this looks right now, I think there are some factors in there that once people begin to look at, they'll realize that they're paying already for things that money could go towards and reduce their monthly bills. But with that, Councilwoman Hoskins, any questions or comments?
Well, if it was put off, it would still have the same wording, correct?
That's up to council. If council would like to propose different wording, they have the ability to do so tonight.
Okay. And would it help to have a workshop to find out how people feel?
Again, that's up to council to decide.
And Madam City Clerk, when would you need to start forming the ballot question committees?
The ballot question rules state that once the resolutions are approved, at that point in time, the city advertises for volunteers, and then I'll bring that back to the council for appointment. If I don't remember the exact timeline, but I want to say it was the last meeting in March.
Well, I'm trying to get a timeline so that Councilwoman Hoskins and all of us can understand when would you have to get these ballot committees together if this were going to be on the November ballot?
I would say no later than April.
Okay, so we're talking roughly 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
1 month, because it's the end of February.
Okay. Any other questions, Councilwoman? Councilwoman Bridges?
Yeah, I have a couple. First of all, I wanted to make sure I understood. The 90% was originally for the payoff of the debt on the Boulder Creek Golf Course, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it wasn't specifically for the raw water line debt. It was that debt. And that debt can't we couldn't start making advance payments on this new raw water line debt for another 2 years, correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's less than 2 years now. We're looking at a year and a half.
Year and a half.
Yeah.
Okay. I like the idea of at least those two. The people that I've spoken to haven't even asked what it would cost. They're just glad it won't come out of their pocket in terms of increased ad valorem taxes. They're also, in terms of the cost of the consultants, where does that money come from? Whether we have one consultant or two consultants, and the cost of putting together these proposals, where does that come from?
It kind of depends on what the amount is. I know in Public Works Admin and Engineering, we have technical funds in our budget. I'm not sure if we have enough to cover those.
The short answer is that there would be, as part of the RFP approval, you would also approve an amendment to augment the budget in order to pay for those costs.
And council did approve the recommendations from the ad hoc pool committee to proceed with these consultants, right? That was done about a month ago.
But that's the committee. The committee does not have the authority to...
The recommendations from the committee were
yes.
considered by council, and that was one
and so
of
what
the
would happen is with the
recommendations.
RFP, as that comes forward, there would be a budget augmentation to approve whatever the cost is for those particular services.
So it would be out of the general fund then?
It would be out of the general fund. Okay. Also, I'm just curious on the... we got this new design for this new bill, for the new utility bill, and it said city water service fee is $25.14. Is that the accurate number now, rather than it was aggregated before?
I don't have it in front of me. So it's different rates for depending on your meter. So the Southern Nevada Water Authority.
Right. There was a Southern. It used to be $37.56, and now it's broken down into the two.
Yeah, just so you can see it clear.
Okay, so it was $25.14 that we pay for that.
And that's not the debt. That's Southern Nevada Water Authority. That's
Southern Nevada Water Authority, I believe, is $12.42.
Yeah.
And then there's the city water service fee.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the $25.14.
That's what the city keeps. Well, the utility keeps for their services.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilwoman Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so first I have a question for City Attorney Morris. The term aquatic center, is there a legal definition to that?
Just the plain meaning. We only have one.
Okay.
So, yeah.
but we couldn't use probably the term pool because there's other things that are, needed for a pool, like pump and things like that.
I think
That would be too narrow, correct?
our Public Works Director has something to say about that.
Well, with our ad hoc pool committee, we were talking about the pool and then the other amenities that go along with it. I would have to say that if we called it just pool, then everything else would be off the table.
It'd be too
I'm
narrow
sure the
scope.
offices that go with the pool and the general reception area, locker rooms, but if we wanted the racquetball or any other things, I would say that would be off the table.
Okay. I'm just trying to find, because I know that there's some skepticism out there about what we are actually doing, what facilities are being attached to it besides just fixing the actual swimming pool. So just coming down to narrow that down as much as possible. But yeah, I understand that. Okay. So it'd be nice if there was something out defined that it was, because I think the term before was used facility, aquatic facility or something like that, a recreation facility. Okay. The other, and then I want to address Councilman Adams' comments. I'm glad that the people he's spoken to are very happy with where we're at. But I have a different viewpoint of that because I think that there's still a lot of concern that we don't have the number that this is going to cost. And throwing this out here, this could be $10 million we're asking for, or, there's still that question is this going to end up being a $40 million pool again? And so looking at the numbers that we've been given, the timeline for an RFP, I don't think that it's safe to say at all that we would have a number, even a loose number, before June when we need to, or July when we need to have these questions sent or removed. And so,
and we would not have those numbers by the time that the ballot questions would need to be turned in. I think, if I remember the discussion previously at the last council meeting, that this was really an attempt to start saving.
Correct.
For the eventuality of either a new pool, aquatic center, or refurbishing, updating the current facility. Either one is going to be an expensive proposition, and either one is going to require us to start purposely putting away money for that eventuality, whichever one that's going to be.
Right. But I feel like we wouldn't have the trust in the voters. The voters wouldn't have trust in this if they didn't know how much that cost is going to be. And that's why I'm hesitant to put this forward now, knowing that we won't have a number in time. Because I think there's a difference between explaining it to them. I mean, you're on the ad hoc committee, and so you've had all this conversation where someone who just looks at these ballot questions has a different feel. And I feel like there's, without a top number, it's hard to say, oh, is this an unlimited amount of $1 million getting taken out? And that's a concern. And I feel like if we had a set number of this is what it's going to cost, we would get better results on a ballot question.
Mayor, may I just make one more point? I just want to remind you just to take this into consideration. The June 2021 municipal election is our last one, so I know you're aware of that. And then after that, the next time that you would have the ability to put the questions on would be November 2022, so a year and 6 months down, a year and a half down the road. And when we decided to go to move our election cycle, it was because there is a substantial increase in voter turnout on even numbered years. It literally doubles. So you put them on in an even numbered year, you have an 80 to 84% turnout. Presidential years are off the chart. And then on, of course, municipal elections, it's anywhere between 34 to 42%. So, but the main point is if you put them all on in June 2021, which of course you have every authority to do so, and then some pass and some don't. And then you have a year and a half to wait. And in the meantime, the pool could close because it's being, I think, we're all aware of the condition it's in. So that's just something to consider as you move forward.
Right. But my also point is that these questions could change by then in June. These are 3 questions. I think there's a total of 4 or 5. Some that we haven't put that are, that were suggested that we haven't even put forward. And that, that formula could completely change by June next year as well, when we actually have a number, because we might not have a number even going into November.
I'd like to point out, and I do appreciate, Madam City Clerk, the pointing out the number of voters or the percentage of voters that turn out in even number versus the odd number. I had proposed that ballot question originally to eliminate our odd year elections because I believe voter participation is important for government. But the fact is, on this matter, it was put on the ballot during a municipal election last time, not a general election. So again, I appreciate your point, but I think that if we are trying to rush this so that we catch that, I'm not sure that that's a factor right now. And Ms. Mannheim, you said there's about $4 million a year going into the capital improvement fund?
From the lease revenue, yes.
Okay. So
That doesn't include it. If we have any sales or anything like that, that's additional.
Okay. So that's essentially a savings account for the city. I mean, that's the purpose of a capital improvement fund, is you put money in there, and then when you have a capital project, which is a large, expensive project, you take money out of there.
Well, you reach out to the voters, yes.
Yes, because here in Boulder City, due to past actions, the voters decided that we need permission to take money out of that fund. But what I'm getting at is that, there's been talk here of how we need to start putting money aside, but in fact, we put money aside every year. Every year there's money that goes into that capital improvement fund for capital projects. And one of the ballot questions that's being proposed here is to take $7 million out of that capital improvement fund.
I would just earmark it for the pool so no one could use it for anything else.
Right.
And then if the other questions didn't pass and we were at a point where we knew the pool wasn't going to happen, that money would go right back to the voter approved.
Thank you. And the point I'm trying to make, though, is to say if we don't go forward with this now, then we're not putting money aside. In fact, if we did take another 6 months to do this, there would be more money in there. This could be up to $9 million.
Well, it's at $11 million right now. It's $4 million a year that goes in there.
Right. So that'll go to 13 next year if no money comes out. Right. Again, the point I'm trying to make is I don't want to see us get into the mindset that the only way we can start setting money aside for this project are these ballot questions. There's money being set aside all the time into that capital improvement fund, and that's one of the questions, is to go to that capital improvement fund and remove money from that, or as you say, earmark money for this project.
The only way you can spend it
Yeah.
is by in through these ballot questions. But it goes into the bank account just like all the other dollars.
Well, and that's what I'm getting at, is that account is increasing, and it's up to the voters to decide if we can take money out of there. But, we can certainly increase the amount that's listed on the ballot question if need be. And of course, we can't take out or earmark more than what's in there. But the point I'm getting at is that the conversation seems to be revolving around, if we don't do these 3 questions and don't do them immediately, that we're not putting any money aside, when in fact, we're putting money aside for projects, not necessarily this project, but for projects that could be available. We're doing that all the time.
Yes, but we'd have to wait for a voter cycle to be able to spend it. So if we had the plans, we would still have to wait for an election. We'd have to wait a year and a half to start anything to get
Well,
in
no,
touch.
we can always do a special election. That's always a possibility too, so. Again, I just want to get away from this, this is it. As much as I like the plan that the finance department came up with, it's not the only plan. And if it's not pushed on to the November ballot, it's not as though things go away and nothing can be done and there's no money and all that kind of stuff. My concern is, and I think Councilwoman Folda mentioned that, yeah, when you go talk to people who love a pool, they'll tell you this is a great plan. When you go talk to some other folks, which I had an opportunity to do over the past couple weeks, they say, no, I'm not going to vote for that. So be careful of putting your finger to the wind and seeing how this is going to work out when folks don't have the answer. There are no caps on this with the exception of the sunset.
There's caps. There's nothing. I mean, there's only $7 million and the $1 million that has the sunset cap. None of that money could be spent except for the pool. So if things changed and voters didn't vote for the next ballot or the land sale wasn't enough to cover the pool, that money would go back to voter approval. It couldn't be used for anything else. Like the city could not use this money for anything except for.
No, but you could turn a basic pool, community pool, into a Tajma pool, as was proposed before. So that's a concern for folks. That's a political concern for folks, that if they don't know what the project is, asking them to approve it, some of them are just going to say no. Any other questions or comments? Councilwoman Hopkins?
Yes, I received several emails just today and yesterday of concern that if this doesn't pass, it's probably not going to come up again. And the caution is that they're not quite satisfied with not knowing a closer dollar amount. And most of the people are concerned that we would pass it tonight and not hold off until June, till we had a little bit more information to use, because they don't want it to not pass.
Anyone else? Okay, I guess we're at a point then. We have 3 resolutions here. I think that's an important factor to realize too. There are 3 resolutions here that we'll take separately. We'll begin with Resolution 7074, placing a question on the 2020 November general election ballot, asking voter approval to use $7 million from the Capital Improvement Fund for the purpose of funding an aquatic center. Anyone wishing to make a motion on Resolution 7074?
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 774.
I move second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Motion fails 3-2.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve.
Hold on. Madam City Clerk, it was Councilman Adams and Councilwoman Bridges. Okay, Resolution 7075, placing a question on the 2020 November general election ballot, requesting voter approval of an annual transfer of $1 million from the Capital Improvement Fund to a pool reserve fund. Anyone wishing to make a motion?
Mayor, I move to approve resolution number 7075.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Again, motion fails 3-2. Resolution 7076, a resolution of the City Council of Boulder City placing a question on the 2020 November general election ballot, requesting voter approval to reclassify the formula for proceeds from the land sale of Tract 350, with 10% to be used for public safety capital needs and 90% to be used for the city's aquatic center. Again, anyone wishing to make a motion?
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 7076.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay. That also fails 3-2. All right, we'll move to Item number 7 for possible action, city appointment to the Regional Flood Control District Citizens Advisory Committee. We do have a late entry onto that, Mr. James Houts. I've known Mr. Houts for a little bit of time here. I do know that he does have a background in movement of water, not necessarily flood water, but I think he would be an excellent candidate for the position. Is there any other nominations for this position? All right, I will move to close nominations then. Do we have a second?
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Item number 8, City Manager's Report.
Honorable Mayor and Council, all transactions are routine in nature that you see in Part A and B. This month, I would like, however, to highlight some additional information to increase financial transparency. You'll note in your packet that on page 149 is the monthly cash by fund balances that is there so that you can see on a monthly basis as I report what the cash balances are for that month. Also, additionally, on page 150 of your packet, you also will see a monthly reserve balances so that you see all the reserve accounts and what those balances are as well. And on page 151 of your packet, you also have a monthly general fund capital project year-to-date activity. So it will show you what expenditures are happening and what particular projects by month. And also on the last column, it gives you the percent complete, if you will, of that particular project. And then finally, on page 152, you have the utility capital project year-to-date activity, which is the mirror image of the general fund capital project list. It's just broken out by the utility enterprise fund. So with that, any other questions that the council may have?
Questions or comments from council? One, I would like to again compliment the finance department. I understand it's called the city manager's report, and that you're telling them what you would like to see.
They're such a wonderful group, aren't they?
But again, I think this is another outstanding improvement going towards how we know what's going on with the money in the city. So my compliments on that. I know too, or I believe that we now have not sure the exact title, capital improvement project manager or coordinator? Coordinator.
CIP coordinator.
All right, thank you. A question that always comes up, because looking at some of these projects, it's like, man, I thought that was like 5 years ago. So having that percentage out there, I think, is also very beneficial. But, I'm not sure what we need to do, but I hope this new coordinator is able to look at some of these projects and things that are done or mostly done or renamed. We can start seeing that money get moved off the books if it's actually already been spent.
Yeah, Carol, she's actually being shared right now. She was in the finance department, and she's still assisting with the budget, but she's jumped in with both feet, and she's got some great ideas. There's actually going to be some minor tweaks on this that just to provide more information at the workshop we had yesterday.
Yeah, it seems like a long time ago.
I don't know. Days are mixed up. The public had made some recommendations for more transparency, and great recommendations. So she's taking those forward, and she's going to be a great asset. I'm happy to have her.
And I know that Diane's unhappy to see her go, but as you say, you can share her. So again, great job on this, and I think it's another giant step in the right direction. All right, we'll move to item number 9 then. Our final public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak in public comment? Mr. Fan? And this public comment period can be for any issue.
My name is Glenn Fan. Good evening again. Just a couple little things. Thank you for the vote on changing the water filtration park to a park at the last meeting. I think A lot of people are very happy with that. Another little thing, rumor has it, I don't have all the details, but that apparently it looks like on the monthly water bill, electric bill, there a lot of times there's a flyer in there about what's coming up, this, that, and the other thing. Well, it sounds like there's a possibility that little tidbit of information is going to go away. I think that would be a mistake on the city's part. It's to some people, it's on a link to the city for information of upcoming events and such. Not everybody's on the computer. I am. I don't have a problem finding out what's going on. As you can see, I come here all the time. But there's a lot of people that's their only link to what's going on in the city. And it's a single sheet of paper. How many millions of dollars does this city go through in a fiscal year? A lot. Yeah, we got 6,000 people. So what's a few reams of paper? The overall scheme of things is pretty cheap. We're talking about $30-40 million for a swimming pool, which is wonderful. We got $23 million water line debt, but we can't afford, a couple $100 out of our $37 month hookup for a piece of paper and a bill to keep people informed with a little bit what's going on. I don't know who's in charge, who's making that decision, if it's going to happen or not. Like I say, it's just rumor. But if somebody knows the true answers to that, maybe they tell the people that that's a dumb idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in public comment? Ms. DeShane?
Judy DeShane. I am glad to see you are putting those ballot questions on about the pool. The people I have heard from and people that have come up and talked to me about it and that they are not in favor without having a better idea. Now, everybody realizes you don't get a firm number when you get something like that, but they are not happy and would probably vote against it without having a fairly decent ballpark figure. That 40 million from the last election really spooked people out. And even as far as that part of it goes, the financing, I agree, the finance department did a good job on coming up with proposals. But everything, it depends. If we don't have the money, we don't have the money. A few years ago, from what I understand, I did not live here at the time when the economy was really bad. There was no extra money at all. So I would really like to see a whole lot more money in savings before we go into some huge debt on a pool. And someone else had mentioned that, if you actually count the number of people, citizens, that actually go to the pool, because a lot of people, either the apartments they live in or they have friends or they themselves have pools in their backyard. And so it isn't as heavily used as what it probably was when it was first put in. There are only so many kids that qualify for a swim team. Let's face it, no matter how good you think you are, it doesn't mean you're really good enough to compete in something like that. That's just how it is. I remember swimming a whole lot as a kid, and another neighbor kid was very good, but there was no way I was good enough or any of my brothers or sisters were good enough to compete at the level he could. So, how many people and how many seniors out of all the seniors in town actually go there for the aerobics and stuff? I can't, because I can't float anymore. We have to look at the number of people, not somebody going there 5 times a week. That's still only one citizen using the pool. So I would like to know exactly how many citizens go to use it. So how necessary is it that we have 3 brand new pools built? I think we need a lot more information than what we've had before we go ahead and dedicate all this money. Also, the ballot questions could maybe be written in such a way that people know that if the pool isn't built or whatever, all the money goes back and it just wipes it off instead of having to go back for another election or whatever. It's kind of like the one that said 90% goes to debt reduction, and now we want to rewrite it and dedicate it to a new debt without paying off the old debt. I think that's confusing, and I think it's kind of doublespeak for some of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? All right, we will close public comment and move to council reports. I think I'm starting at this end this month or this week. So, Councilwoman Folda.
Yes, I just want to reiterate what was said in public comment today about there's a lot of meetings coming up this next week that are really important to have public input. These are going to, direct our historic preservation. We have a budget meeting, and we have the facility study. All these meetings take place next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So just camp out outside City Hall and show up for all of them, and then go over to the multiple use building on Thursday for the historic preservation plan kickoff. But we really, I know that when I'm researching and looking at things like our master plan, when we're making decisions, we look at the outreach that was done with the master plan, and these are similar plans that, we look at the citizens and their input to guide us in decision making, and I just really hope that we can get a lot of citizen input at these meetings. And that's it.
Thank you. Councilwoman Bridges.
Yeah, first of all, I love the Mardi Gras lights. I was driving by Arizona, and I thought, oh, they're going to be white lights. No, they're purple and gold. I thought, and green. That's really neat. Will that do that for the different holidays? Is that what?
We're working on the programming right now, but yes, we can change it to pretty much any color. Staff actually came in at 4 a.m. to make sure it worked.
Oh, it looks fantastic. It was fantastic. Also, this today was, I rushed back here, Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition. We are now back to being a Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition, at least for a year. It seems like what we're going to be doing is having the next meeting with Bill Marion from Marion Purdue and having some brainstorming about what it is. And I think there are a number of us who all are interested in looking at environment as a possibility of a direction to go. We had a presentation of the Nevada statewide greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and also the RTC, as part of the Southern Nevada Strong, has part of the plan at looking at environment and heat-related issues and tree canopies and things like that. So I thought that was fascinating. And finally, we're all going to be getting new bills. And I could tell you that I spoke to John Ensminger from SNWA, and he says it's about time that we're breaking out that SNWA charge, because at least people can blame them, or I'm on the board, us, for some of that cost. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Councilwoman Hoskins.
Yes, I attended the one-stop fair at the library today, and they had 12 employers, and we had 60 applicants. So it was very inspiring, very successful. Saw someone else there from the staff. Then I went to the celebration at the courthouse, and that was very enlightening. So I've had a really, really busy day, but it's been a very delightful day. Thank you.
Councilman Adams.
Actually, I would just like to thank council for the productive conversation I think that we did have with regards to the questions for the pool. I know that some people out there might feel like we hit a roadblock or we're not moving forward, but as much as it might seem that way, this actually is progress. We are talking about it. We are making decisions. We will go back as a pool committee. We have this information. We'll move forward with it. So this is part of the process. I'm not unhappy with how it turned out. Obviously, maybe I would have thought it could have been a better way, but I do really feel that we can continue to move forward in a positive way for the community, and I think that with the not even passing with the council, I feel that does show that we are still talking about this and that maybe it wasn't the right time. But I just wanted to make that clear that I think that we do still have the ability to move forward, even if at this time we're not ready for it. So just said that. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I was informed last week that Boulder City's bowling team won the state championship, and that was the 125th state championship won by Boulder City High School over the years. Who would have thunk it? Old Boulder City. Couple other things. Again, I appreciate Mr. Adams' comments there. I can assure everyone that my enthusiasm for getting the pool that this community does this taken care of is at the very top of my list as far as capital projects for the city goes. So I have no intent to slow this project down. I think that we're better served, though, letting the community know what our intent is before we start asking for large amounts of money. And the Mardi Gras lights, you've had one supporter. My initial reaction was, nah. So it may grow on me, but I don't know about that.
Well, just,
Okay.
Mayor, remember, we can always change the colors. What's your favorite?
Well, I did notice there was kind of a blue and gold thing. I thought, well, BCHS colors, maybe that might work.
Well, and actually, part of the light that we can do, I saw the UNLV lights, I saw, the Golden Knights lights, so forth and so on. So it's actually pretty amazing, the capabilities that we have there.
Yeah, they had done, they attempted to do Valentine colors for Valentine's. The pink and the reds aren't quite right. That's part of the programming. And then they also did red, white, and blue for President's Day.
Well, I appreciate the creativity. I'm just, sorry. We can be creative in other ways, I think. But anyway, with that, thank everyone for coming this evening, and we're adjourned.